Howdy Meeps, welcome to the Meeple Syrup Show. Hey everybody, it's Sen here, live on a Wednesday night from London, Ontario, Canada, and tonight we have a special guest with us. Keith, how do you pronounce your last name so I don't butcher it?
It's Matejka.
Matejka. Okay,
Yeah,
see,
yeah.
I've been pronouncing it with like a, I don't know what I say.
Yeah,
Actually,
I've heard of them all, so it doesn't matter to me really.
Doesn't matter. You've been like, it's been massacred so many times.
Yeah, in
But
many different ways, right? So
Matejka.
Matejka, yeah.
Matejka. And what kind of last name is that?
It's Bohemian, so it's like it's like the Czech Republic, so it's like it's in the Czechoslovakia area.
Cool.
Eastern European, I guess, but when my ancestors came over, it was Bohemia, but like that country has changed names a couple of times since then. So whatever.
Cool. Oh well.
Yeah.
What have you been up to lately, sir?
I'm making games, man. It's
Right.
super fun.
Yeah, super fun.
That's what you hope to say.
Yeah.
Now tell us the truth.
Yeah.
I've been crying in misery.
Yeah.
No. So it's been like the last couple of months have been crazy with lots of conventions. Like usually people think of the summer season as being the convention season but in general, like the last 6 weeks have been kind of crazy for me. One being at Essen, and then I kind of took an extended kind of time there with my family, and then I've got a show in Ann Arbor, Michigan this weekend, and so I'm missing out on BGG-Con, so that's a bummer. But I'm sure I'll have fun in Ann Arbor, and then PAX Unplugged. I mean, there's Thanksgiving, and then there's PAX Unplugged. And then I'm going to Hawaii for the holidays. And then I start over in 2020. So the last kind of couple months of the year have been pretty crazy travel wise, but it's all good, you know.
At least you get a vacation in there at the end.
Yeah. Well, Germany was kind of a vacation. So I went 2 days early, spent some time in Paris. I brought my kid and my wife and my mother-in-law. And then we went an extra day and a half in Germany, and then did the show, and then we had another day in Germany, and then we came home. So we did some sightseeing as well as some conventioning. So it was a good time.
That's good. Jesse, what's been up with you lately, bud?
I have been working on game design. And
Oh, it's like a theme tonight.
It's like
we're all working.
we work on games.
I
We
know.
work on games.
You guys should do a podcast about this.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe we should.
And how is that game going?
Kingdom Rush is forever.
Yeah, right?
Is that still going?
Yeah.
Sorry, I did not mean to be
No.
like
I mean, yes and no.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of lessons learned about making big campaign games that have lots that generate their content and replayability through multiple scenarios instead of some intrinsic feature of the system. And every scenario you make means the next one is that much harder to make, as long as you're crazy like me and insist on everything feeling different. I don't want you to set up two scenarios and then be like, oh yeah, I remember this kind of feeling back when I played scenario 3. It's like, no,
I've already done that.
That's right. There's got to be some new spark every time. And
that is Jesse's downfall.
Yeah.
Jesse's
Not
downfall.
Or genius.
Yeah.
And or genius, right? What about you there, Erica? What have you been up to lately? I know that your things just closed today, didn't it?
Scott Pilgrim just closed. I think it was yesterday. So that's awesome. Yeah, it did. It did pretty well. I did over 200,000, and I think there was over 150 or 1,500 backers. So
it's awesome.
I was like, that's pretty cool for Scott Pilgrim. We'll see how it does at Comic Cons and all those things, fun things moving forward that are totally its audience.
Right.
So that was fun. I'm trying to think. Yeah, mostly just been doing kind of cleanup work on some stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at with a lot of games.
You're heading down to BGG-Con, right?
I am going to BGG.
Okay. And you have some pitches ready?
I actually do not. It was intended to be a work thing, and now it's turned into more of a, I'm still going to have meetings. Well, sort of like I'll be, I have arranged time with people, but I'm not actually bringing anything.
So I actually find that very useful time.
Sure.
Build those relationships instead of trying to hard sell somebody, right?
A tiny little bit of a break. So it'll be a good way of getting to actually just be part of the industry rather than feeling like you're always chugging through the industry.
And play Fog of Love.
Yes, you all have to do that as well.
You have to play Fog of Love. Okay, cool.
I haven't been to a show or just gone to play games in a very long time, and I really want to. And I think maybe I don't want to have to wait till next year for BGG-Con to do it, but like I definitely want to go to some shows in the next year and just like have fun being a gamer. Yeah. It's crazy. And that's always the struggle when you're working on games. Yeah. It's like you sit down to a table with some friends, and like if you're playing a published thing, you're like, well, I've got 5 prototypes that I actually should be playtesting, and like I feel guilty for playing something published instead of working on these things that all need attention.
Right.
But so you have to kind of discipline yourself to say, okay, I say Tuesday nights, I always play published stuff. So no matter what. But what sucks is that if you start playing something like a campaign game, then you're kind of locked into that game a bunch of times, and then you don't get a wide variety of different published stuff. So it's like the struggle. I mean, it seems so stupid, but like the struggle is real.
It's real.
Like, keeping on top of like what all the new stuff is, and like
there's this hilarious quote from a show that nobody's ever seen, but I'm still going to do it anyway. There is this this ridiculous British show called Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, and he has a line. He's a horror writer, and he has a line where he says, "I'm probably the only writer that has written more books than they've read," and like sometimes being a game designer almost feels like that, where you're like, I feel like I've made and played games that don't actually exist more than ones that do.
Yeah,
I found that to be true when I worked in video games for 15 years, and it was always like surprising, I think, to people who are just entering a game development studio. Is like a lot of these guys don't play a lot of video games. Like they've just been
time.
Yeah, they've been working on code for games for years, but like they don't really keep on top of the newest releases and play the newest stuff because they've got their little piece that they work on. And that's kind of it, so.
Yeah.
Definitely. Shem Phillips says to fly to New Zealand and you can just hang out and play games with him.
I like that idea.
That's a great idea.
It's funny.
While you're at it, you could probably, you got a good beard going there. You could probably, audition for the Lord of the Rings Netflix series. They're looking.
They need extras.
I need I'm interested. I'm all about that. But yeah, Shem ordered some stuff for my website or something recently, and I wrote on the outside of his package. I was like, "Hey, dude, I'm a big fan," or whatever. So
how can you not be a big fan of Shem Phillips?
That's awesome. True. It's true.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Good guy. Before we get started with the interview portion of stuff, I'm just going to say hi to everybody, like Shem, Jesse Fernandez, Patrick Langley, Zach Connolly is there, Adam Young is here, Helena Capel is here. We got lots of people online waiting to chat with you and ask questions. So if you're out there in Meeple Syrup Land and you have a question for Keith, please do put it in over that way. I think it's that way into the chat over there, and we can ask Keith as they pop up. Okay. So let's get started. Let's talk games. Let's talk design.
Sure.
So what was the first game that you think made a splash for you as a designer?
Hey, so the first game that I published and I designed some other stuff that always end up on the shelf that I kind of decided wasn't kind of publishable.
Right. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Which, they maybe see the light of day someday. But the first one is a game called Bullfrogs that I self-published. It was the first game I put on Kickstarter. So that's a with the little mini expansion, like a 1 to 4 player area control game that still has its fans out there. And then it did fairly well, for a first time guy in a small game. I thought it did, had some success on Kickstarter, and I eventually licensed it to Renegade to publish it. And they redid the cover. Jackie Davis redid the cover, and they did a little bit bigger box, and they put it out. And then it kind of ran its course with Renegade, and now I have the rights back to it. And I've got a little expansion. I've got a medium level size expansion sitting on a hard drive somewhere, and I might go back to it someday. We'll see.
Very cool.
Just keep it going.
Yeah.
Right?
And I was exploring retheming it at one point too. So I actually have 2 or 3 rethemed versions of it laying around too. So I like that game. But it's interesting. When you put out your first game and then you play it a bunch, you demo it a million times, and a bunch of people have played it. There's sometimes little things pop up, and you're like, if I could go back in time, I might change that thing. So there's a couple of those in Bullfrogs that, even though the rule set I think is fairly simple, it was inspired by kind of a mix of Pandemic and Rainer Knizia's the battle line.
Right.
And there's a couple things that I would love to go back and kind of update, but
that's really
I mean, I don't know, that I can't see it happening anytime between
right.
like before 2023 or something, but it's something I'd like to go back to.
Cool. And then the big game I think that kind of cemented you and Thunderworks in the zeitgeist, in the mind's eye of the game playing public was Role Player, right?
Right, I'm the Role Player guy. Right,
yeah, you're that guy.
I get introduced as that guy all the time, which is it's fine. It reminds me of this. There's a tangent. There's this interview with the. You should look it up sometime. There's an interview of the singer from Warrant on from like VH1 or MTV,
right?
And he's like talking about how he's the cherry pie guy, and like how much he hates that.
Oh, they hated that stuff. No.
So I'm the Role Player guy, but I don't hate it, right? So
you love it.
I know I do.
It.
Yeah,
I had a spark of inspiration, and I was terrified that I was so surprised somebody hadn't done it before, and I was terrified somebody would in the meantime. So it was this crazy process, like, kind of what Jesse was talking about, if we're like playtesting 3-4 times a day, making changes between each one every day for like, weeks and weeks and weeks to kind of dial it in as fast as I could. And so that went on Kickstarter, and I was like really excited about it, and it did okay. It did about 52,000, which in the world of board games on Kickstarter these days is kind of a mild success, right? Especially with a game. Yeah,
you can never judge Kickstarter because it's like one thing's going 1 million, the next thing nothing goes over 50, then things are doing hundreds, and then not even hitting 30s. Like it's all over the place.
And I had these massive expectations, like most game designers do, because I thought it was the greatest idea in the world. I couldn't believe that like people weren't into it. But there's so much to be said for marketing, and also it's kind of I think it's a hard concept, like for some people to wrap their brains around until they kind of play it. But that game, I did a mild, conservative print run, and then kind of reviews came out, and people were like basically were going crazy for it, and I had very few copies left, so I was basically being the small publisher with my like very limited cash flow, trying to print as fast as I could, as big a quantities as I could to try to meet demand, and it took me about a year to do that. But for a good 9 months, it was like constantly answering questions of like, hey, where can I get a copy of your game? And it's like, it breaks your heart a little bit that you have to basically say, well, just keep waiting, it's coming, I swear. So yeah, Role Player has done really well for me. I mean, if people aren't familiar with it, it's like a dice drafting, dice manipulation game about building fantasy characters, which sounds really boring, but I think it's pretty fun. It's really very puzzly. And it kind of scratches that itch for people who are into RPGs and for people who are into board games, which it kind of crosses over those two audiences pretty well. And when anybody that likes kind of generic fantasy stuff, that it also has that kind of look. So
yeah, I've heard it compared to Sagrada a lot.
Right, like that's the most comparable game, I guess. Sagrada came out on Kickstarter like soon after Role Player was done. And it's like, I know Ben up at Floodgate, and I see those guys every once in a while because they're in Minnesota. They're right next to me, so I see them every once in a while. And it's one of those things where, like, sometimes people have I forget what they call it, where people kind of come up with similar ideas at the same time.
Parallel design.
Yeah, it happens all the time. I'm happy that they've kind of carved out their kind of more casual space, and then I've kind of like the big brother in terms of complexity. I have my little space. So when I was playtesting it, I was hearing rumblings about a very similar dice game that was coming out of the Homunculus guys, which eventually came out to be Too Many Bones, which Doesn't play which doesn't play anything like Role Player. But
I was gonna say that's quite
right.
That is a very different game.
But right when somebody says, "Oh yeah, I played a game just like this at this other company last month," and I'm like, getting worried about it or whatever. It turned out okay.
Well, do you ever see those the honest board games, and the title for that one is Too Many Rules? Have you ever seen those?
I've played Too Many Bones once.
Yeah.
You know what? In concept, I love everything about that game in concept, but then you try to do it, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on.
I've been in that position,
yeah. Oh, hey, let's ask a question from the audience. Shem is like dialed in. He's like right on.
He's got a bunch, yeah.
This is it's actually
the same question
repeated twice because he's really consistent. That Shem guy.
I missed that.
So much so that we should probably have him on the show sometime.
Sure.
What do you think? Should we get Shem on the show sometime?
I'd watch that episode. That's for sure.
Shem asked, question: do you have a strategy in mind for the Role Player universe? He's reading our minds already. He is a day ahead. He's in New Zealand, right? So that's why
he's already seen
the show.
He's already seen the show.
They're psychic. It's fine.
As far as, do you have an idea for the Role Player universe as far as things like player count, game weight, game length, for foreseeable releases? So he's curious if you're looking for specific games or you just see a game and think, this could work in the Role Player universe.
Right. So let's talk about the Role Player universe.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Which actually has a name that people don't know yet, which is but it's not. It's probably easier to just say Role Player universe. But
no. Tell us.
It's the world of Ulos is what it is. But,
okay. So in the Role Player universe, I mean,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How do you spell that?
ULOS.
ULOS. And what is that? Is that like just a word that you came up with?
Yeah, it's just some, that's how these fantasy things work. You just gotta make up words.
Okay, so it doesn't have any hidden meaning. It's not like initials of all your kids stuck together. Or...
No.
But
although there is the story of like the name of my company was created by my son, who was like 4 years old or something at the time.
He said Thunderworks.
Well, the first time he saw fireworks, he called them Thunderworks, and I was like, "Oh, that's a cool
that's awesome."
So,
I love the kidisms. I have a list for my first one never did it. My second one did it with everything. So I have a list of all these words of like, and he'd always tell you you're wrong. Right. Like if you try to correct him, no, you're wrong.
Right. Yeah, the 5-year-old knows best, I think, in general.
Right.
But let's talk about how the Role Player universe came to be. So, Role Player started out as like, the idea was like, make it as generic fantasy as you can so that like people can kind of put their own veneer of thought of what these characters are and how they exist in a world in their mind, right? Like, I wasn't intending to build a world from the beginning. I was actually trying to have a clean slate, like a blank canvas. And then it kind of coming out of Role Player, there's quite a few people that would say stuff like, and I still get this to this day, of like, Role Player is really cool, but I want to do something with my character.
Right.
And I mean, I was getting that comment even when I was playtesting at the very beginning, but like I was kind of hard-nosed that that's not the game I wanted to make. I was like, usually when people say that, I'm like, if you want to do something with your character, go play Descent or Mice and Mystics or whatever, like, or go play D&D or whatever. So the analogy that I always use is like, to me, Dominion is to Magic the Gathering as Role Player is to D&D or Pathfinder, where it's like, it's the meta game before you play the other game.
Right.
So like doing something with your character kind of pushes against that whole concept. So, but obviously I still get that comment. So the first expansion, which is called Monsters and Minions, was kind of the half answer to that question. It's like, oh, you can fight some stuff if you don't want to build your character, but at the end of the day, you're still building a character. And if you do too much fighting, you're going to regret it, But the real answer is kind of the full answer is this game that I've been working on for 2 to 3 years called Role Player Adventures.
Right.
Where you can import your Role Player character no matter what expansions you have. And then you can go on these kind of choose your own adventure, narrative driven, choice driven kind of storylines. That's about like 60% reading and making choices and like 40% rolling dice and manipulating them.
And is it a solo game then?
It plays 1 to 4 players, so that's the first cooperative game I've done.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's I'm excited about it.
Yeah,
so,
good. I'm excited about it.
If you're gonna build all these adventures, you have to have a world to have these adventures in.
That is
so
true.
Then we started working on this like 3 years ago. So then all these kind of the world started building in the background, and I'm working with a good friend of mine, James Ryan, who's like the lead writer, and we've been working together to kind of build out this world so that we can have these cool adventures. And then, but I'm still working on other games in the background, whether most like Cartographers and Lockup are both games in the role player universe. And when those come to me, I see these games that other designers are showing me that I'm excited about, and they're fantasy, and I like fantasy stuff, but it's the thought of just doing another fantasy game isn't nearly as compelling to me as like, hey, what if we can tie some of these games together? Why not make
keep the world growing too?
Right.
Yeah.
So things like, I signed Lockup, which takes place in a fantasy prison. So then we're like, well, let's make one of the adventures and role-play adventures in the fantasy prison that Lockup is in.
That makes sense. Like,
yeah. There's these characters that you're playing these you're working on these games, and you like either have to come up with characters or for reasons like, why don't we use this world that we're building? So there isn't as much of a strategy about like, hey, role player games are all medium weight, 1 to 4 player, 90-minute experiences like that. I'm not really kind of treating it that strictly. It's more like what games I sign is very fluid. It usually revolves on like one factor: does Keith really like this game?
That is a good factor, right?
Right. I mean, it's worked for me so far, so I'm not really that going to deviate anytime soon, I don't think. But so I played Cartographers from Jordy, and I thought it was really cool. And his fantasy is like, okay, well, how do we fit this into the world? So then we've gotten the opportunity to do like a lot of forward-looking Easter eggs in some of the games. For like, if you play Lockup, there's tiny little things on the board that are objects that are in role player adventures, so that when you play through role player adventures, you might see some of the things
that's nice
that were on this board that are in this game.
Now, do they have any purpose on the old board? Or are you going to remember them, or are you going to only remember them if you saw them?
Only if you saw them.
Oh, okay.
It's like referential.
Yeah, they're kind of true Easter eggs.
Yeah.
In that way. And then in terms of like what is next for the world of role player, besides the role player adventures game, the idea is that we're going to do that on Kickstarter, hopefully in June. But is that I'm going to do some more role player games. I don't really want to repeat genres. Like I don't want to have 5 roll and write games in the world of role player.
Right.
So I'm not sure what the next one is yet. I've got a couple that I'm looking at that I might end up signing that will end up in that world. But in my mind, like Thunderworks games falls into multiple categories. There's the fantasy role player stuff, and then I've got historical games, which the first one was Dual Powers by Brett Myers and Quan Chai. And I've got some more historical games coming, and then kind of some more of my family stuff. So the first one was this dice rolling game called Blend Off, and I've got some more medium weight games coming that are more family games.
Blend Off with Scott Eaton, right?
Yeah, up in Minneapolis. Yeah. So it was known for Codenames Duet more than Blend Off at this point. I think.
So strange. That was a really weird story too. It's really came about.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this fanboy turned designer.
He literally just asked on a forum, "Do you think I should ask them?" We're like, "Yeah, go ahead." What are we gonna say? The worst they can say is no.
Right. There's nothing to lose.
It was great. It was really good.
So I don't know if that answered Shem's questions, but
well, you know what? I think when Shem comes on, we're going to ask him the exact same questions, because I have all the same questions that he asked about, paladins and architects, and I wrote in the role-playing game for him. So it's like, is there a world? Are we actually building something here? What is this all about?
I always think it's interesting. There seems like a lot of work. Maybe I don't want to do the work, but like when you play a game and they've clearly put a ton of work into the world building. It has little to nothing to do with the gameplay that only like the most devoted of fans are going to pay attention to, versus like starting out with nothing and then over time kind of evolving the world. It's been kind of a fun project to explore and fun to kind of see where it's going to go. It's like I don't have the greatest of plans, but I'm having a fun time riding the ride on it.
Right, and it's kind of organic, and that's cool. Shem actually wanted to know how you balance design versus publishing, because I'm sure he's in the same boat. He's such a selfish guy, that Shem. He just wants all the answers to like better his life.
Well, he's got Renegade to help him out on that stuff. I don't very well is basically the
I'm learning is the answer. I'm learning.
Yeah,
I don't do it well yet.
Yeah. So
flexible mindset.
So the only things that have been released that I've designed are Bullfrogs, Role Player, then the 2 Role Player expansions, and then Skull Hollow, which was published by Pencil First Games, right? And so that was kind of my easy one, where like I promised Ed that I was going to work on this game, and he had deadlines, so like I have to carve out time to work on design because I have a committed project. Versus like I'm just going to explore some of the ideas I have. Like it's really hard to be like a small publisher where you're wearing all the hats and like carve out design time that for yourself. Because there's a lot of I've signed other designers' projects, so those all need attention as well. And I also, feel passionate about making sure those games are as awesome as they can be and have strong launches and are of the most quality. So, it's hard. I find it hard to put my own designs first when there's a million kind of problems that are screaming at me that need to be solved, whether it be, doing art direction for some artist that just turned in a bunch of stuff, or, customer service stuff, or organizing the next convention and making sure I have staff to run demos and all that stuff. So
are you pretty much a one-man show? I know that you have some other people working with you, like Lisbeth and stuff, but are you pretty much like doing all the art? You said art direction and con support and, broken stuff sent back to you guy. And
yep, I'm that guy.
Like the chief cook and everything. Bottle washer.
Yeah.
I'm I do the dishes too, but I'm the guy. It's technically a one-man company. I get help from friends. Tim Vernig, who's a local guy, does demos for me at local stores and stuff.
He's like your ambassador.
Yeah, it's Tim is a great guy, and he takes the bulls by the horns on a lot of stuff, which I really appreciate. But
yeah, it's great.
I've got contractors. Like I'm not doing my own artwork, but I have contractors. And Lisbeth, she manages. Lisbeth's boss, she's in the Netherlands. She manages all my international licensing deals. So, which is a big weight off my shoulder. Just because I want those things to happen, I want them to exist. They don't make a ton of money for me, but they take a lot of work. And I'd rather pay her to do that. And I don't have a lot of passion for that work anyway.
Right.
But in general,
sense, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I need to find more of those parts of my job to pass on to more people, or find people I can trust that can kind of figure that part out.
Right.
Grow as a company.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you need to do.
Yeah. I need to grow, but like growth is scary, right?
It is. It's finding the right people too.
Right. There's a lot of risk there. And it's like the thought of like bringing on an employee is like terrifying because there's all these additional like tax things you have to worry about and like
rules and stuff.
I know. I'm not good with rules.
Yeah. Have more kids. They can inherit it. And
free labor.
Yeah. It takes a while for them to get to that point, but yeah, it's not.
Yeah, there's so much work to get there,
though. Yeah. Helena Capel is asking, what part of the journey do you like the best? Publishing or design?
I mean, it's like I like that initial spark idea. I like the initial iteration. Where like once you're on the path and you're just kind of like refining, I'm not a huge fan of that process. I mean, just because like it's so much work to get that last 5-10%. I'd rather pay somebody else to do that kind of work.
Right.
But in terms of publishing, it's like the moments that I like the most, right? I love the moments when I'm interacting with my customers the most, honestly. Like whether it's at a convention and people are excited to talk to me about my games, or like some customer emails me and tells me that they they have some problem, and I like solving that for them and like making that kind of one-to-one connection with people, or hearing stories about how it's their favorite game, or like, you know, my buddy just got into board games and loves your game, that kind of stuff. Like, as those are all like makes me feel like a rock star sometimes. So like I really liked that part of it. It's kind of ego driven.
No, it's good. We actually had a conversation offline today about similar things where we, as game designers, you don't have a lot of feedback on when you're doing well,
right,
in so many ways, right? So when you actually get them, yeah, it's
kind of a big deal. Yeah,
yeah.
But
you know, it is a big deal. Celebrate it.
Celebrate
it's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
We can celebrate it.
I don't really celebrate my own successes very often, so like when it kind of forces me to in those moments. But in terms of like just the actual job, which piece of the job that I like, I know I mentioned art direction, but that's actually one of the pieces that I like the most. Like I like working with creative people, and I love like the visual art. So like I really like doing art direction and working with artists.
Cool.
I mean, I worked with when I was in video games. I worked with artists too, 3D artists working on characters and vehicles and stuff. So, like, I really love being part of that process. Like, I don't have that skill set personally, but at least I can be a part of like bringing it to life and holding the vision for what the product should look like.
Right, you have a good eye for that.
Not as good as Helena's, but it's pretty good.
That's what she's saying. That's her favorite part too. The best part is art direction. What did you do in video games? Actually, I kind of want to dig into that a little bit.
Sure. So mainly in production. So that's kind of project management. I was at the last 11 years. I was at a development studio called Raven Software, working on Call of Duty games,
right?
And a Wolfenstein game and a game called Singularity. But I worked on a bunch of those kind of games, managing the asset team, which are like the Rockstar artists. The guys that are doing weapons, vehicles, characters that take like, you know, this character is going to take me 8 to 10 weeks to finish, kind of stuff. like
super high polygons.
Yeah, and then before that, I managed like single player teams. So that would be like just groups of animators and environment artists and just kind of in charge of the level and making sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing and everybody knows what the deadlines are and people are getting the bugs they need to fix and are aware of the deadlines and that kind of stuff. And I worked in QA before that. And I also worked at a publisher called Konami in California, working on a bunch of their music games because I have a background in music, which gave, like, I was working on some of their karaoke singing games. So as a result, I got to meet Simon Cowell working on some American Idol stuff.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's fun. And I worked on some of their more kind of properties like Silent Hill and Metal Gear, and that was kind of more on the QA side than project management.
Right.
But, yeah.
What was the turning point that led you from being full-time in video game to now full-time?
Right. So now I'm full-time in board games. Right. So basically I saw like the James Matthews and the Jamie Stegmeyers of the world, like being successful on Kickstarter and being really like transparent and offering lots of good advice for people. And I had just kind of started, I had playing board games with my friends at work every day. And one day we're just like, hey, instead of, we make video games for a living, I'm sure let's make some board games instead of playing them all the time. So we did that. The other two guys kind of dropped away and I kept working on stuff. And I saw him have lots of, I saw all that success that people were having on Kickstarter because it was like the new thing. I was, the first project I backed was the black box edition of Glory to Rome, which is the best card game in the whole world, by the way.
It is a good card game.
You forgot to say it was the best.
Well, it's a good card game. I do like it. I do like it. And the black box edition is, obviously awesome compared to the clamshell edition, which is I like it makes my eyes bleed sometimes.
I've gotten so used to the clamshell edition that like I have them both copies. Yeah. And I play the clip art one.
I mean, you might as well because you leave the other one pristine so you can sell it on eBay for $7,000 someday.
Yeah, maybe someday.
Maybe.
But And then I worked on Bullfrogs while in the night while I was still at the video game company. And then basically what happened was the first Kickstarter for Role Player Monsters and Minions did exceptionally well. At the time, I think it did like 460,000 or something like that. And that's kind of like for a one-man studio, it felt like kind of life-changing money.
Sure.
That's
and I kind of had this realization, like, first of all, I make more money doing this board game thing if I can maintain this, which obviously is kind of a bit of a very optimistic view.
Sure.
Than doing my day job, and I just enjoy it much more. So I kind of developed this exit plan for myself of like, which is like minimize debts and then like, kind of shore up all the things that I need so that the safety net, like not having a safety net I'm not that far from the ground that if I fall, it's not as big a deal. So I focused really hard for about a year to like pay my house down as far as I could. And then just did a lot of research to figure out like how much my health insurance was going to cost, like coming out of pocket. Cause that was like a big concern because both my wife had a stay-at-home job and you Canadians don't have to worry about that. But like,
no, we don't.
It's like, hey, am I going to be able to pay $1,000 a month for my medical insurance if I quit this job? And I basically just talked to my accountant. We looked at the historical data for the last year and said, I'm like, is there any reason that I have to keep this job and I can't just kind of keep, make the jump? And she's like, no, we should go for it. So I did.
Okay.
That's awesome. That's really good.
So, I mean, I thought about it for a long time and I had a lot of other friends that I was talking to about it, and everybody's saying, yeah, just do it. And it's when it's not your risk, that's easy to say, right?
It's easy for you to say.
Everyone will say, go for it. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, some of that is like other people wish they had the opportunity to go for it,
That's true.
And eventually I just did. And it's been good so far.
Yeah. So you think are you living the dream, Keith? Living the dream.
It feels like it.
Yeah.
Honestly, and I'm very grateful of the success that I've had. There's a lot of really great benefits about working at home. Whether it's being much more flexible with my schedule or like being around my family when they're home instead of like when my employer decides that I can go home. But it also means that I have to solve every problem. And I can't I don't know. I can't just kind of slack off, one day versus another one. I definitely work a lot of hours, but
that's true. You can't turn off because if you do, you're just disappointing yourself now.
So
yeah, but do you ever turn off? Like, do you say I'm stepping away from the keyboard for a weekend? So no. You just can't untether, can you?
It's difficult.
But what about Hawaii? What are you gonna do in Hawaii?
I know I'm gonna have like my phone when I'm at Hawaii, like answering customers' emails and stuff.
Don't do it.
I just assumed, yeah. So I mean, definitely when I came back from Essen, I was gone for 10 days or something. Yeah. Like, I basically was up. I worked like crazy hard for like 48 hours to try to get back on track.
Sure.
But I still did a lot of business while I was out there and still trying to, at least partially solve problems. But
Helena says, I feel like I'm listening to myself talk.
With a much deeper voice, right?
Yeah. And more facial hair. Just a little more facial hair, Helena.
Right.
Just a little.
I got it. Shem is saying, what is turn off?
Yeah, exactly.
But you know what? This is a really good point too, though, is that like to truly love what you're doing oftentimes means that you're doing it all the time.
Right.
Like we do have to realize it's amazing to get your dream job, but your dream job doesn't know how to turn off.
Yeah.
Right. And like as I'm growing older, like my perspective on what happiness is and all those are kind of evolving. And
tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about your perspective on happiness.
Yeah.
Let's go deep. Let's get deep here.
Yeah. But I was like, my example was I was talking to my kid. I mean, it's when you have children, and you start to see the world through their perspective, you start to realize, oh, I used to see the world like that, and now you can see the delta much more, and trying to explain things to them about like why things are a certain way, and then you realize it doesn't make any sense that it's that way, and you don't have a real good reason why it is that way. So my example is like I was talking to my kid, and he's like, "How come you never want to do anything fun, Dad? Or hey, let's go do this crazy thing." And I had to kind of explain to him that like, kind of the thing that I like doing most is working, and like that sounds like horrible, but like I get immense joy out of working on these projects and having them come to life and seeing people enjoying them and stuff. That like, it's great. And yeah, you never turn off, but like, you're not, the thing that you're turning off is something I love. So it's hard to get too upset about that,
Yeah. Adam has a question. Adam Young asks, you mentioned loving the initial spark, making a new game more than the rest of the process. Any advice for getting through the rest of the process and finishing it?
I mean, talking about finishing things, that's the hardest piece, right? Like everybody's got great ideas. Like I truly believe that like everybody's got at least one or two really great ideas like right now.
I have 3.
You're like 30, so you're saying you're 33% better than everybody else, Jen?
He's an overachiever.
It's the execution that's the hard part, right? It's like, so that's the piece that is hard, and how do you get through that process? I mean, some of it is just tenacity, and some of it, I think some of it is like that's certain people's personalities. Like I finish things. I don't bother starting something that I don't intend to finish, at least at the beginning of the process. Like maybe someday I'll say, oh wait, it's time to make a clean cut and move on to something else. But like, how do you finish the game? Or I don't know. I mean, my current process is like I hire somebody to do it.
Right. So like John Brieger or something.
So I've been working with Brieger for the last year or so. He finished Lockup. He finished Cartographers. He finished Fiends and Familiars. But
distance is good too, right? Like giving yourself that break, or even having like, as you're saying, had the developer come on. I think sometimes people forget they don't have to do all of it.
Right. That
it's okay to have it come back, have that fresh eyes again. Because I find 100%. Getting stuck on something oftentimes is that motivation, right? And it's motivation is a tricky thing, but when you're too connected to something, it's hard to be motivated because you can't see away from it.
Right. Yeah. And some of that just comes out of playtesting too. It's like, when you're stuck, you get out there and start playtesting. And I think having a regular playtesting schedule is like super important. Like I always playtest at least for 3 hours on Thursdays, and then I try to get it in whenever else I can. And making for me, like playing that game usually inspires me to like, all right, let's fix that thing, or like this was great, let's move on to the next thing. To me, playtesting is super motivating. So then, I mean, you also run into that problem of like, a masterpiece is only done when the artist puts his pencil down, kind of thing. So like, you can play test till the end of time. So just like figuring out like, this is horrible to say, but like when good enough is good enough on a project, and so you can move on to the next thing.
Done is better than perfect.
But yeah, I mean, it's 100%.
In a lot of ways,
deadlines, right? Deadlines matter. You have to hit printing deadlines and shipping deadlines and everything else.
Yeah. Is this an art or is it a business, right? So there's a decision point for a lot of us who are in the business as a business.
Right.
But if you're just starting, it actually is hard to finish a lot of things because it is an art at that point, right? You're doing it for the love, and you don't know when to put the pencil down.
Right.
But when you say, hey, for like $1,000, $1,500, I can get John to finish this last 5-10% for me, I'm spending that. I'm spending that $2,000 or whatever it costs, because that's time that I could be spending sparking up a new idea to get it ready for then John to take over at the next stage, right? And I think that's sort of the wonderful life cycle of a good development cycle. I truly believe that, not just because I'm a developer, but because I think that is the best way to do the game, to get that fresh set of eyes, to get that kind of clean cut and not get so stuck in it yourself that you're so close to it that you can't see the forest for the trees, right? So
well, that's it. You become blind to your own work until you have that distance, right?
Right. So some of this came from like working in video games for so long, where like we have a specific schedule, we build out the schedule and we follow it, and then you start cutting. Yeah, I'm all about cutting stuff out, so to make sure the scope doesn't get too big, to make sure we're hitting what we want to hit. Now I'm determining the schedule, so I can be kind of more flexible with my own schedules than I could back then. But that process is important. I also think as you get older and get into things more, especially when I was first starting out, it was all like the limited resource was money, right? Time is like I as much as you want. Like I can spend as much time on it as you want. But kind of as I get older and kind of I start focusing on Thunderworks as a business, time is the resource that I value most. Right. So if that means, hey, I can save like 40 hours of time by throwing a developer a couple $1,000, like I'm in, especially if it's somebody you trust and is going to do a great job. So
I think that is really, in my opinion, like that's what I'm saying. Like if you can, because a lot of times we think of this business as publish or perish a lot of times. Like if I'm not publishing, if I'm not making a new SKU, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do.
100%.
I'm spending all my time on that last 5% that I just can't get past. I'm actually not doing what I'm supposed to do, which is creating a new SKU for my business, right? So it's this weird kind of dichotomy that you get stuck in. And I'm hoping that there are more, again, not just because I'm a developer, but I'm hoping that more companies like kind of almost wake up to the fact that development not only saves you, is a spend of money, yes, but in the end, it saves you time and gets you rolling faster, I think, anyway. But that's just me and Jesse.
So, like, if I was taking one game from beginning to completion, and I was taking to 100%, I'd probably be able to do like one game a year, maybe.
Yeah.
Whereas then if I have my development team and I can kind of touch more games, but let more people help me finish them, then I'm like last year, I've 3 games came out that I was working on, 3 from Thunderworks and 1 the Pencil First game. So I wouldn't have been able to get that many games done without that help. So I guess the question is like, what is that person's goal? Like, but as a publisher, you said feast or famine. I think, if I don't have a release for a year, then like I'm not sure where my the cash flow is because
or the company's relevant, right?
I was going to say, who's going to pay for the next one? Because part of that, too, is that constant cycle of needing games to start paying for the next one until you're large enough that that's not a concern.
Yeah.
Right. Definitely. Like, when you print something and I've got whatever, $50, $100, $200,000 locked up printing something, it's like I just don't have that money for 6 months. And then when it hits shores, once it starts selling, it might take 3-4 months before I see any of that money anyway. So, like, it's hard to operate on that kind of like cash flow ups and downs. And there's ways to help with that with like getting loans, and obviously Kickstarter is helpful. But you kind of have to have at least a certain amount of games coming out.
Yeah, a cycle. Shem wants to pick your brain some more. It seems it's the Shem Phillips Pick Your Brain show.
Yeah.
Yes. Question. I like how he does that. Question.
Well, he wants to be very clear about it.
You can pull them out easier. I like that.
True. Thank you, Shem.
It should be a requirement.
Yeah. Can you put that in bold? Do you use any scheduling / to-do list software to stay on task, or have any tips around scheduling well?
Sure. So I'm like an Excel guy. Like I don't use any kind of fancy stuff. Like Excel works for my needs. I'm very comfortable with it. And you can do some things to kind of make it more pleasant on the eyes, but Excel's always been my go-to scheduling tool. And then in terms of like task tracking, I use Trello for that, and I also use like my piece of paper that's like, this is the critical stuff that I write down. And whenever I'm starting to feel like overwhelmed, it's like I got to get this out of my head. And I just write down the most important stuff. And then I'll go back and knock stuff off of Trello or I'll come up with some things to put in there that I got to make sure I don't forget. But and then just email is a tool, is just like anything else. I use lots of folders in email to like put things in certain areas so that like when I'm trying to look for that hotel reservation for that convention that I booked 6 months ago, like I know exactly where it is.
It's in the travel folder.
Right.
So what he's saying is you're a very organized person and people should learn from you.
I do all right.
Maybe. He does all right.
I have a pretty good memory about I tend not to forget things very easily too, so it's just helpful. Yeah. But in terms of methodology, one piece of advice is knowing like what scale to schedule stuff at, like what perspective, right? So when I'm looking at a manufacturing schedule, or like I don't know, like a project schedule, like don't get into like what are you gonna do per day kind of level, or even a lot of times per week. Like really like take a step back and make larger blocks of time, and then put what you think it is, and then add 20 to 50% to the schedule and every single step of the way, so that you can accommodate things that change. Because the thing is, like, if you get really detailed on a schedule, like the next day something's going to change, and all that work you did is going to be down the tube. So it's important to kind of figure out, like, depending on what you're working on, kind of what scale you want to be scheduling at. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's like a little tip, I guess. Yeah.
Cool. Let's see. So we've got about 10 minutes. So people out there in Meeple Syrup Land, if you have questions for Keith, please do put them in the chat. We're going to talk a little bit more with Keith about some other stuff. So we've talked about publishing. We've talked about world building. We've talked a little bit about design. What else is in the works for Thunderworks?
Sure. Well, we talked about Role Player Adventures. That's kind of like
that's pretty cool. I'm looking forward to
that's the big one coming up. That I almost feel like I've been talking about it for so long that people are sick of me talking about it. But I'm excited about that. And so that's the biggest project Thunderworks has ever done. Had like three writers on the core game, and then another 2 writers working on supplementary stuff. And then I did all the design, and it's currently in development with John Brieger, among other things. So that's a huge project for me, especially for like a small company. I see, the Awakened Realms guys and all these other big companies doing these massive games with tons of miniatures and like all these storybooks and 500 cards and all this stuff. It's like just the amount of manpower that it takes to make a game of that scope is overwhelming. I just can't really imagine what it takes. Like, I'm getting a better idea now because I've been working on this one, but I've always tried to really scope my projects to something that I felt comfortable with. So that's one of the reasons why I haven't ever done a game with any plastic miniatures in it, because that's like a part of the business that I'm not that knowledgeable about. And like, I wasn't personally like ready to make that step. And that seems like a small thing, but it just definitely has a bunch of gotchas and things along the way that I just know they're going to be harder to schedule for. And but like I've got a couple of those projects coming up that I'm kind of putting my toes in that water. But so Role Player Adventures is coming. We're working on I did a game called published a game called Cartographers earlier this year that did really, really well. It's basically, there's still a few copies out in retail, but it's pretty much sold out.
Oh wow, good.
So that's cool. So that was the first project.
Are you reprinting?
Yes. So I sold 700 copies of it at Gen Con. And I basically said, I need to reprint this right now because I print with Panda, who takes quite a long time on their productions, but the quality is of a certain caliber. So it'll be coming back in January. So we're going to do some more Cartographers content. Like, obviously people like that game.
Right.
So it's an interesting story because the original designer, it's kind of like this weird sub-licensing madness where like the original designer is Jordi Adan from Brazil, and he licensed a bunch of stuff to a small publisher in Brazil, who one of the members of that studio is the graphic designer on all my stuff.
Oh,
so they wanted to publish it in Brazil, but they wanted to sub-license it to me in all other languages, and obviously gave me a super good deal because we're buddies. And then John Brieger came on and did development on it as well. So then it came out, and then in the meantime, the original designer got a job at Simon in Brazil as a developer. But so now he can't really work on more cartographers' content because he works at Simon. So then now, like, John Brieger, who was the developer, is essentially kind of taking over a lot of the design role on the sequel. So the idea, while we're letting cats out of the bag, it's basically a standalone sequel that has pieces that you can mix and match with the original one. So it'll be the same kind of form factor and price point as the original. So so that's kind of fun and exciting. It's interesting to see, like, to try to predict trends. Roll and writes are obviously very popular. You could arguably say that maybe they're past the bubble on roll and writes. I don't know.
We're about to find out, right?
Yes, I guess. Yeah. If ask me in August, and I have a warehouse full of copies of cartographers, then we'll definitely know for sure that it's a bust. But
I hope not, because I think there's enough vintage genre that people just enjoy it. Right. There are haters, don't get me wrong, and yes, there's a boom. But I gotta think, if you like it, you like it, and it doesn't turn off.
I think there's a lot of really good things about roll and writes.
So what were you gonna say, Jesse?
I was gonna say good games stick around. I mean, we have the industry has these ebbs where certain mechanics become popular for a little while. And then after that popularity dies off, you still see the good games coming out using those mechanics into the future. Right. So,
there's still good deck building games that come out.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. And then worker placement before that. So,
yeah, I will see. I think the legacy games are a little bit more outside that idea, just because the amount of work that it takes to make a legacy game.
We'll see what happens as that evolves too.
Right. Maybe they'll become easier to make with some invention or some kind of new trend. But
it's the content and the testing, I think, that really makes those ones difficult.
Right.
Because if you're making a 10-game legacy game, that's like designing 10 games that have to happen in sequence.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Versus designing another roll and write game. I don't want to downplay the amount of work that it takes to design a roll and write game, but if you compare it to a legacy game, I think it's kind of apples and oranges, right? So
I think you compare a lot of things to legacy games to make it apples and oranges.
Right.
Apples and beach balls.
There you
go. So we'll see where that goes. But
that's really exciting.
Anyway, so yeah, we're working on more cartographer stuff.
Yeah.
I've got
Cartographer's Adventures.
It's currently called.
Oh, that was a bad joke.
Yeah, actually the bad joke that we've been saying for a while is the working title has been Cartographers, but I've said that we can't call it that, guys. So we'll see what we end up calling it. Right now, I don't want to say, but it's just the next Cartographer's title. And then I've got two kind of games coming from other designers. One is called Cape May, which is kind of historical city building. Has a little bit of Concordia in it. It has area control, which I love. From a designer called Eric Mosso. It's his first design, and we've been developing it quite a bit over the last year. And that's got Michael Menzel on art, so he's known for Stone Age and a bunch of other Euros. So it's going to look like a Euro, and it's a Euro, and it's a good time. But Cape May is a city in New Jersey. And the game takes place around the turn of the century. The city is known for being one of the first resort towns in America, and it got hit with tons of disasters and lots of interesting things that happened in that area. And there's never been a game about it, so here it is. So that one's called Cape May. That's 1 to 5 players. I've got in general, all Thunderworks games, like moving forward, all have to support single player as well. The only exception is that blend off game that I signed from Scott Eaton a long time ago.
Right.
And then there's another title called Theme Parks. So it's a theme park building game that has from another new designer that I found at a Protospiel named Nate Linhart, who's out of Chicago. And that's got a little bit of kind of Baron Park in it, where you're building Tetronomos in your area, but it's got a worker placement element to it. The artwork's Vincent Dutre, who's well-known board game illustrator. And that's it's got this cool 3D cardboard carousel in the middle of the board that you can that you get to spin at certain parts in the game, and it affects the prices of different rides that you're building and stuff. So
sounds fun.
Yeah, it has that kind of nice table presence that people like. It's always kind of one of those things that you kind of think of after the fact. Like, hey, does this game have table presence? And it's like a yes or no thing, or maybe there's an opportunity to kind of bump up the table presence of a game. But definitely when you're playing something and people walk past and they're like, oh, that looks interesting. Like, it's interesting to think about, like, why does somebody say that? Like, what is interesting from somebody looking at a bunch of cardboard and cubes and plastic on a board versus somebody walking past a table that has cardboard cubes and plastic and doesn't say that, right? So trying to find out what's like is intrinsically pleasing to the eye, or what like looks like it creates some interest in a gamer from a distance is like, I don't know what the answer to that thought is, but it's kind of something interesting to think about. So that's theme parks, and then I'm working on some more Skull Hollow stuff with Ed, so there will be more, obviously. That's been Ed's most successful game to date. Mm-hmm. His biggest Kickstarter to date was Skull Hollow, and people seem to dig it, so we're going to make some more stuff. So.
Oh, nice.
That's great. Last question from Brad Batchelor, and then I'm going to give you a little
Bachelor.
Brad Batchelor. Who's actually in the Michigan area, so I mean, maybe you'll see him at UConn.
Yeah, you should stop by.
Brad, stop by at UConn in Ann Arbor. He asked Keith, would you ever consider doing another shared universe besides Role Player?
Sure. Why not?
You're easy. It's like,
let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's make that thing. So what would it be? What do you think it would be? Would it depend on the game that you saw?
Yeah, I mean, it would have to start. It would have to start with like one stellar game, right?
Right.
And then, and with the success of that thing, then we would branch out and build it out. So, I think anything that's easy to, like, you throw things into thematic buckets, So, like, let's say I had a game about Vikings, and then I was like, well, maybe I'll make some more games about Vikings, and then we start to build this universe, or
that has paladins and architects in it,
and you lived in New Zealand, right?
Right.
Or if like, I'm kind of notorious for like not really liking space games by default. Like, I don't know why it's very rare that I rarely get into them. But like, I could easily see like, hey, this is this great space game, and then let's build out this world. Like I like, a lot of times space games start leaning heavier into the theme, and kind of the mechanics aren't as solid. Maybe that's part of it. But I mean, that's a super blanket statement to say, like, I don't like space games. But that tends to be my inclination. But like, I can see doing like a space world.
Yeah, you don't like space games yet,
right? I mean, I love Star Wars. I love Firefly.
Yeah,
like I love space stuff. It's just some of the tropes that I think space games tend to fall into. There's something about them that I just don't get that excited about.
Those end up really complicated.
Yeah, because I mean, science fiction, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Quick question. There's another one. Daniel Kazmaier. I thought this was a good one. So he said, sounds rad about the whole table presence idea. How do you think product design could be put into play testing at earlier stages of design?
So, I mean, I think it's all about when you build prototypes, like get them as close to the final products as you can, with the resources that you have. And then that's where you're gonna you'll start getting feedback not only on the design, but you'll start getting feedback on the presentation as well. So I know, like, one of the things I say anytime I do a play test and like the only feedback I'm getting from anybody is about the graphic design of the game, I know the game's doing pretty good, because it's like that's like the least important thing usually at that stage of the game. So and like once you get into the process of designing something to a certain point, then you can start building nicer prototypes, and then you can do some experiment, some A/B testing of like, if we built it like this versus we played it like this, and then you could play test both ways and see what kind of comments or maybe no comments about those things. I'm definitely like, my playtest style is more of like a watch and see what they say versus like prodding and asking specific questions, unless it's like something I'm really focused on, because I don't know, it's like whenever I get feedback, the middle of the road stuff is like the worst feedback of like, oh, it's okay, or I want either hate it or love it, and I want to hear why. I don't want to have to like push you to respond, because then you probably don't feel that strongly about it anyway. That's kind of my thought on that. But.
Cool. Oh, look, there's more questions. What? Everybody ask questions earlier. Just kidding. It's fine. I'm fine. Is your focus world building or mechanisms based design? Would another theme be a role player in another theme? I'm not sure what he means by that, but
I know what he means by that.
Yeah. Okay.
If you put a different face on it.
Oh, I see. I get it. Yeah.
So yeah, I get this suggestion from people every once in a while. It's like, hey, you should make like a superhero version of role player, or a space version of role player, or a caveman version of anything, because it's like you could kind of take that system and lay it on top of any other role-playing game system and kind of mentally extrapolate what that would be like. I've talked about doing that, but right now it just like it hasn't been a priority. I don't know. I like to work on new things, so kind of taking something and retrofitting it to another theme isn't like super exciting. It would have to be like some pretty significant changes to the systems to kind of catch my interest again. But I mean, you can see with, I'm trying to think of an example. I'm sure there's lots of Euro games out there that like have multiple versions, whether it be like Carcassonne Safari versus Carcassonne, the Canizio one with the green box. I can't remember what it's called. Or like, people kind of re-implementing the systems with slight variations and thematic changes. Do people like that? I always kind of feel like it's a little bit of feels like a cash grab to me. But I mean, if one theme just really doesn't speak to somebody and another one does, then maybe that's their entry point into the line. I don't know. So
it is interesting because I know lots of companies look for that. They're looking for a system that they can put all the licenses that they have on and things like that. And I guess that's a very different beast. It's what a company that has all those licenses already, and so they're saying, what can we use these on? And they'd love something where all the licenses they have access to can sort of use the same mechanism so they can play together if possible.
Right.
There's different versions of the same thing.
I think there's examples in the video game world too where people do that, where they take something and they reskin it with a different theme or some slight changes, and then kind of try to resell it to the same customer, whether that's like the latest version of Madden or the Call of Duty games I worked on for a long time. So my instincts are to not do those things because I'm not personally interested in it, and it's kind of me doing most of the work on these things. So, I'm not sure if I always make the best business decisions, but I try to make the decisions that are most interesting to me to maintain my interest in what I'm doing. Right.
Sure.
So
that's important, right? You got to keep interested in the business if the business is going to keep growing.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm still learning how to be a decent businessman in addition to designing and like, product development. And it's like we talked at the beginning, there's like all these different hats and different focuses, whether it be marketing or sales or product development versus like kind of high level business decisions. Like, it's a
That
lot.
doesn't sound like game design and fun.
I know. Some of those things are fun. Some of those things aren't. But they all need to be done.
Those aspects of business, and you know what? Sometimes you can just like business, like that's fine too.
That's okay. So
Right.
Keith, I'm going to give you a little bit of a reprieve. I'm going to ask you to think of your final statement, which will be a piece of advice for new game designers or publishers, or just think of your final piece of advice. You've already given a lot of good stuff. And Jesse, what's going on with boot camp, buddy?
I need to write up another milestone.
So we're on milestone.
Another
3?
milestone coming.
Yeah,
milestone
so
3.
milestone 3 is coming. So we just Monday was milestone 2, which was to have made a minimum viable prototype, and I just have to make the page, the little write up, and post that. So that should be up tomorrow for milestone 3. Which will be to make 3 more minimum viable prototypes.
Wow, cool. And so I know a lot of people are asking if they can jump in at any time, and the answer is 100%.
Of course you can. And additionally, just because you don't meet a milestone doesn't mean you dropped out. It's more guideposts than they are like hard and fast rules. Yeah, that's right. It's a way to, part of the goal of bootcamp is to reveal at least what my design process looks like, how I get from an idea to a pitch. And so you can follow along that journey and see if it helps you, keep you on track. And we're all there for each other together. We all have different schedules, and some people are at BGG-Con and they ain't working on their, design projects. They're playing games and having fun, and that's cool too. So
cool.
Yeah.
All right. So as we get done, I'll just let you know that we are happy to be part of the Roll to Play Network, where we are hosted alongside a lot of other great RPG and tabletop material. So go to the Roll to Play Network, check it out, check what's there. If you like what you listen to, subscribe and follow. We are also on Patreon. It is Happy Thanks Patreon Day over this week. I think I don't know what they call it. This
is
hashtag.
it?
Yeah. I have to do something for Patreon.
You should do something.
Yeah, and thank you so much to all our supporters on Patreon. We've got some great people on there. Lots of them are in the feed right now, and hopefully you will continue to support us, and we will continue to bring you great things. Erica and I have been trying to get the video from Fan Expo done, so that'll be something that only the patrons get to see, which is wonderful for you. And if you have friends who like our content, see if they'll support us. It'll help us just do more better things, like get Jesse a new mic. And other than that, it's a Black Friday thing. If you want to contact us, you can reach us at Meeple Syrup on Twitter and the Meeple Syrup Shop Talk page on Facebook. That's the best place to reach us. And Keith, I think I actually have your Twitter up here.
You had it earlier.
Yeah.
I double checked. I've already added you, so that was good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And did you just run out of letters there?
I did. I ran out of characters. Like past Keith, maybe you could have made a better decision on how to deal with that, but at the time, that's what I went with. So
it's one of those early Twitter things.
Yeah.
You have one leg.
Right.
One leg.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's been. I left the ES at home. I don't know.
There you go. All right. So, Keith, can you give us your final words of advice?
My final words of advice are: don't give up. Just like it's true. But like, be ready to fail and be ready to stand back up and keep trying. I mean, I think that's like a great piece of advice for anything in life, right? So, anything in life worth doing probably isn't very easy. So, just keep at it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Keith, for joining us. Thank you for bringing us all the information on the role player world. And adventures sounds awesome. I'm in. First day backer, hopefully.
Awesome. Awesome.
Jesse, good luck on the rest of Kingdom Rush. I'll be putting my work in the next couple of days as well. Erica, have fun at BGG-Con. The rest of us won't be there.
Play some games for me.
Yeah, play.
I plan on playing a game.
Yeah.
That is
play
such
some
a
games for us.
novelty for me.
Goodbye to everybody. Oh, I haven't said hello to Daniel, Brad, Jonathan Harb, everybody else who joined late, Sir Bob. So thanks very much to everybody out there in Meeple Syrup Land for following us and sticking with us a couple minutes extra overtime. I'm sure that was okay. Chris Anthony, thank you very much. Nate Lindhart. Oh, Nate Lindhart's here. See?
Yes, the designer of theme parks right there.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks very much for joining us. And we'll see you guys all here next week. What do we got coming up next week? Erica, do you remember?
You always do this, and I should always have it pulled up, and I never do. I suck at this. If we just did a digging, I believe the next one is a spotlight. Oh, is it Kwanchai?
Oh, it might be.
I think it might be Kwanchai.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah.
Kwanchai's a fun guy. I like that guy.
He is.
I,
He did a game called Dual Powers for me last year, so I enjoy working with him. Super nice guy. Yeah.
I think he wants to talk business.
It is. It's the industry episode. So November 27th, Kwanchai Moria will be coming to the Meeple Syrup Show. My brother from another mother. He'll be talking about the business end of illustration. So don't ask him about what pen nibs he uses or what tablet he uses or how many brushes he has on his phone.
Ask that personally. He'll tell you anyway.
Yeah, he'll tell you anything. We're going to talk about the business end of setting deadlines and how many edits he'll do and all that kind of stuff and sticking to his guns on that.
And we'll have to bring up the video, that Thai video that he's in now.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. I love that thing. Cool. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you later.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Meeple Syrup Show. If you'd like to help support our podcast and the live show, please visit www.patreon.com/meeplesyrup. Thank you for your support.